Welcome back to the Ghost and Me podcast. Cody, how are you doing tonight, good sir?
Fantastic, man. I am so excited to meet Geraldine. It's not even funny.
Geraldine is by far one of my favorite people in this sphere because when it comes to telling the story the way that it needs to be told, she is a great shining example of that. Because as you know, the details in high strangeness cases can be murky at best, can get lost over the years, but Geraldine's done a phenomenal job in just bringing these to the masses and telling the story the way that it was told to her as a young, as a young lady. So I think, Cody, we need to just give Geraldine a call right now and get this started. All right, Cody. So we're joined by Geraldine Sutton Stith. Geraldine, how are you on this nice Friday evening?
I'm doing better. I've still got a little head stuff going on, so if I sound kind of weird, that's why, or if you hear me cough a little, that's why. It just is lingering and won't go away.
Well, hey, no worries there at all. We appreciate you making it for us. I think we had to cancel. I think this is our third tries the charm here,
Our third
thankfully.
try, yes.
So,
And
Yeah,
lot
it's
go
been a long time coming. And no
absolutely.
worries, I
So,
just got over the flu myself, actually.
yeah, it's definitely going around, and I think half of my employees have been out sick in the past week. It's just been pretty much a never ending wheel here of someone gets sick, we bring them back, then they get sick again.
Yep.
Yeah,
It's rough.
it's pretty bad this year, man. It's pretty out there.
No, for sure. So, Geraldine, for those of the audience who might not be familiar with you, would you mind kind of introducing yourself and explaining your role in the Hopkinsville Goblin story?
Yes, of course, my name is Geraldine Sutton Stith, and my family was involved in the 1955 Kelly, Kentucky slash Hopkinsville Goblins encounter. It was my dad, my grandmother, and several aunts and uncles. There were 11 people involved that night.
So, at what point did you become aware of your father's story? Because I know we've talked on my other show a few different times, and I kind of know your story a bit better than most, I would say. But
Right.
one of the things for me, it's always interesting, is that you didn't really grow up with this story, and there's this weird narrative. I think now, as cryptids, there's kind of a career in being a contactee where people are making money off this. But in your family's case, it was kind of the opposite. They wanted to be left alone for the most part because of the
Right.
ridicule and things. So,
Exactly. Yes, it was very rough. Back in 1955, when this happened, people, it was just bad for them. It hit them hard. It hit them furious. People just ridiculed them really bad. Didn't want to believe it. Of course, the people of Kelly that lived in, amongst them in the community, they believed it because after the fact, a lot of people heard and seen things during the day and during the night that night. And, this all came forward later. And so, a lot of the people around there, and even some of the police officers and military, I mean, I have found out so much since the last time we talked, that so many people knew something was going on that night. It's absolutely mind blowing. And yes, they were ridiculed. It was really hard on them for years. I mean, forever until, even to this day, the three that are still alive, it still haunts them. They don't really want to talk about it, don't want it brought up, don't want really nothing to do with it. And so, but it's such a great story. It's got to keep going because it's now a part of Hopkinsville and Kelly's history. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to keep it going. And this will be the 70th year the incident happened. And we're actually going to have a Goblin Con this year,
Oh my
which
goodness.
we're really excited about. We're getting it together. But as far as me knowing about it, my parents kept this story hid from us. And good reason. They didn't want us involved in it. They didn't want us to find out and get ridiculed over it or say something, out of context about it or whatever. But I was like 8 years old when I found out, and that was by chance. And that was because this man and woman came one afternoon to talk to my dad about this. And like I said, we knew nothing about it. Now, the older siblings, people that know the story, know that my mom was married to her first husband and lived there in Kelly also, and they had 7 kids. So the 7 above me knew this, but they kept it hush. And But this man and woman came one Sunday afternoon to talk to my dad, and that's when we found out about it. This incredible story that terrified me from then on, making me go to the doors and windows every night, closing the shades and the curtains and, everything because I was afraid these little beings were going to look in at us like they did my dad and my grandmother and them. And so it was scary. It was scary for me hearing about it as an 8-year old, not seeing them. I can't imagine them being there and seeing them, especially the 3 younger kids that were there that night. My Aunt Mary was only 7 years old, and she's a very tiny little woman. Even to this day, she's really tiny. And so I can't imagine them seeing these things that were as big as they were and not knowing what they are.
That had to have been so terrifying to
Yes.
experience. And
Yeah.
not only that, but just the way that it seems like your family behaved and based off of how they were treated, to me, it only really boosts the validity of the story. Because I
Ex
mean, no one wants to be ridiculed, especially after going through something like that, you know?
Right, and you got to know this family. They were a farming family, of course. They were a poor farming family, and, my dad, he always said, "Your word is your bond," and so when people wouldn't believe them, it hurt him to his soul because, they experienced something that night that none of us will ever experience, hopefully not anyway. They were just trying to get help. If they had known things were gonna turn out the way they had, they would have just stuck it out in the house and just tried to make it through the night. But they left trying to go get help. They wouldn't have done that if there wasn't anything going on.
Of
Uh,
course.
that's another big factor that makes it so believable. And, my grandmother being the person she was and everybody in the community knowing her, she was a big church going woman, very religious till the day she passed away.
Mhm.
And, people believed her. Even my uncles, my older uncles, Junior and Frank, they wouldn't believe my dad and my uncle JC because they just wouldn't believe the story. But when they found out that my grandmother, their mother, had said it was real and told what it was, they totally changed their whole minds about it. Said if Mama says it's real, it's real. It happened.
They
You
certainly
know,
sound like some no nonsense kind of people, you know?
right?
Yeah, I
Now,
just
Gerald,
go ahead, Bob.
no, I was just going to ask for the audience who may not be familiar, because you are kind of the authority on the story, and it's always bothersome for me to hear the story told incorrectly. Could you kind of give a synopsis of what occurred that night? Because there's a lot of misinformation out there, as we've discussed over the years, and some of it I've brought to you, some of it you've brought to me. So could you tell the story? And for those who aren't familiar, Geraldine has several amazing books about this, and to me, if you're going to hear the story, Geraldine's version is the only one that really matters. As much as I hate to say that, not that there's not some phenomenal investigators out there who have unearthed things like you mentioned at Fort Campbell, for example, but you kind of have the behind the scenes knowledge. So would you be willing to share with the audience what happened that night?
Yes, I sure will. Of course, it was 1955, Kelly, Kentucky. Now, Kelly is a little like wide spot in the road, is what we call them today. Back then, there might have been 150, might have been, population of 150. And these were farmers. My grandmother, she had a small farm, about 27 acres. They had a little tobacco crop on it, had a few, animals and that type of thing. But the weekend this happened, it just so happened my grandmother was there, Miss Glennie Langford, and then there was my 2 uncles. Now spare with me here, guys, because my brain is just not
Yeah.
doing well
No,
tonight.
Not
no problem at
Uh,
all.
my Uncle Lonnie and JC, who were 12 and 10, and then my Aunt Mary, who was 7. They were there, and then there was my Uncle JC and his wife Eileen. They lived with my grandmother to help her on the farm. Now, my Uncle JC had just gotten back from the Korean War. He hadn't been home very long, maybe a year and a half, something like that. And so he had been in the Korean War. And that's who stayed on the farm, who lived on the farm. Now, the weekend this happened, it just so happened my dad, with his first wife, Vera, And their friends, Billy Ray and June Taylor, were stationed in Evansville. They worked with a carnival. So they were close to home. It was about a couple-hour drive. So they decided, since they were so close to home, hey, let's get away from this and go spend the weekend, see the family, get some home cooking, get away from this for a while. And so they were able to do that. So they get in there like Friday afternoon. So they've spent Friday and Saturday with the family enjoying the weekend, and Sunday hits, and they know they've got to go back to work Monday. Well, Sunday evening, they're all, doing their last little bit. My grandmother actually goes to church that evening, and she gets home and they have supper, and everybody's calming down and doing their thing, and the men are playing cards and carrying on. And Billy Ray decides to go out to the well to get some water. They didn't have plumbing. So as he's out at the well, he hears something, looks up toward the sky. Lo and behold, there goes something across the sky he's never seen before. Silver, oval-shaped object with what he calls the colors of the rainbow flowing behind it. He watches it for a few seconds. It's about 40 foot above him in the air, and he's watching this thing go across the sky, goes behind the house into the back field, slowly comes down and lands in the back gully out of sight. He doesn't know what this is, so he runs in the house and starts telling everybody what he saw. Of course, my grandmother tries to reason with him and tells him, says, Billy Ray, maybe it's just a shooting star. No, he knows what that looks like. That's not what it was. Well, we've been having meteor showers this month. Maybe that's what. No, that's not what it was either. So he keeps on. They don't know what's going on. And so my dad sees that something's definitely wrong. It's out of character for Billy Ray to keep going on about something like this. Plus, he was ghost white, sweat running off of him. So he tells him, says, let's go back out there and you tell me again what you saw. So they go back out to the well, and they're standing there. He does his motions, pointing and everything, tells him again what he saw. My dad still tries to reason with him about the shooting star and the meteor shower, and Billy Ray's telling him no. Lucky, that was my dad's nickname, Lucky. It was none of those. I know what those look like. And my dad tells them, listen, well, there's nothing here now. Let's just go back in the house and enjoy the rest of our evening of what we've got left of it. So they're walking back to the house, and as they are, lo and behold, out from the field where Billy Ray saw that object land comes this little being. It's about 3.5 foot tall, big round head, big round glowing eyes, huge ears, arms all the way down to the ground, almost touching. And its legs aren't moving, it's floating on top of the ground. Well, what is this? Neither one of these men know what it is. We wouldn't know what it is. They stare at it for a few seconds, and then they run into the house, slam the door behind them. Everybody stops what they're doing. What is wrong with you two? Well, we just saw something, and they try to explain. And of course, they're all thinking, all right, Billy Ray done got lucky out there to go along with him with this little joke to scare the girls, because these were all young people. Billy Ray's wife wasn't but 18 years old. And these were all young people in their 20s. And it's like, that's what's going on here. And they kept on and they kept on. And my grandmother told them, says, listen, you two, I've got to get these 3 kids to bed, and you're not helping any. Well, she finally gets the kids in bed. And when she comes back to where the men are, well, she sees my dad standing at the front door and finds out Billy Ray's at the back. One's got a shotgun and one's got a rifle. And she's thinking, whoa, okay, this is serious. So she goes to the back door where old Billy Ray is and goes out there with him and says, hey, Billy Ray, what exactly did you see? And he told her, he says, Miss Glennie, I hope it's something that you never have to see. So she squats down there beside him. It's a quiet night. There's a full moon that night. And you can see as far as the eye can see during a full moon. Billy Ray's jumping at every little sound that's made, and it's just like, okay, my grandmother is sitting there and listening to the banter in the house and carrying on, and lo and behold, around the corner of the house from where she's sitting, there comes this little being, big glowing eyes and all, Well, she lets out this blood-curdling scream. Everybody comes running to where she's at. My dad helps her up off the floor, and she tells him, I just saw it. There is something out here. And she tries to explain what she just saw. About that time, they hear a shot ring out in the front of the house. They go running to the front. My Uncle JC shot one through the window. Well, Billy Ray goes rushing out the front door, and he's standing there, and there's this little stoop over the front door, and he's standing there. And there's this little clawed hand that comes down trying to grab his hair. My Aunt Eileen grabs him and yanks him back in the house. My dad runs out there, turns toward where the hand came from, and there it sat, as big as you please. A little being, big glowing eyes and big ears and all of it. Well, he shoots it. Of course he's going to hit it. He's a country boy. He knows how to shoot, especially as big as these things are. And it rolls and floats away. Somebody screams there's one in the big tree. So he turns around, and in the big maple tree, there sits one on a limb. He shoots it. Of course, he hits it. He hears it when he hits it. It pings. It floats to the ground, rolls, and scurries off. All right. They don't know what these things are. And they are not dying. They're getting up and rolling away. So what are they to do? All right, by this time, everybody has seen them except for June. She refuses to look. She's closing her eyes. She's screaming. She's crying off in a corner somewhere. The kids are crying. What are they going to do? And so they're coming up to the windows and doors, but they did figure out if they kept the lights on that they would stay in the darker shadows. So that helped them some in keeping them away from the house, but they still kept coming up. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know what these things were. My grandmother told my dad, well, maybe if we quit shooting them, maybe they'll stop coming up, to the windows and doors. And my dad was like, well, Mom, I don't know. I don't know what these things are, and I'm not about to let them in this house to find out. And the weird thing, too, about the whole situation was when they would come up to the windows and doors, they had their little hands up in the air like they were surrendering, like they knew what that meant. And my grandmother also told him that maybe something's wrong. They got their hands up in the air. But my dad said, I don't care. We're not letting them in the house. We don't know what these are, Mom. And so this continues. They don't know what to do. Like I said, they're shooting them everywhere. He gets everybody quiet and settles down, and he tells them, he says, listen, we're going to go to Hopkinsville. We're gonna go get help. We'll get help. This is going to be okay. So he gets them all quiet, and just as he thinks it's about the right time to run out the door, lo and behold, they hear one going across the tin roof. As it's going across there, its little nails are clicking and scratching, and, just makes your skin crawl and your hair stand on end. And June starts really screaming. The kids are crying again, and Vera asks my dad, "What are we going to do? What are we going to do?" And he tells her, he says, "Listen, we're going to get out of here. We're going to get help. Just calm down." So he gets them calmed down again. Well, he tells Billy Ray, he says, "Billy Ray, let's go out the back here and just take a quick look." So they go out the back door and they step out into the yard. And like I said, it was a full moon. You could see everything. They're looking around, guns in hands. And Billy Ray turns around, grabs my dad's arm and says, "Look, there's one going up the side of the house." Sure enough, there's one going up the side of the house headed toward the roof. Well, my dad aims his shotgun, shoots it, he hits it, it falls to the ground. It pops up and it floats from the back of the house over to a fence post, which is about 40 foot away. All right. Now, this really gives the men pause because this thing just floated in front of them across the yard. So my dad tells Billy Ray, let's go back in the house. Let's try to get out of here. Just don't say what you just saw. So they go in the house, and of course they hear the gunshot. And my grandmother asks my dad, what did you just shoot at? And he says, it's okay. And Billy Ray said, we just had to shoot one off the house. It's okay. We're okay. So he gets everybody settled back down again. My dad does. It gets quiet. There's nothing coming up to the windows and doors. My dad thinks that maybe when he hit that one that time it hurt it, because when it got to the fence post, he shot it again and it fell off that fence post. And it didn't scurry off just as fast as they had. So he's thinking maybe I finally got one. Anyway, it gets quiet again, and he says, let's go. So they head to the trucks. They rush it to Hopkinsville. Of course, looking behind them the whole way, they run into this little police station in the middle of the night. This is 1955. One little officer on duty. You got 11 people from the ages 7 to 50 running in there in the middle of the night. And he's like just awestruck. And they're trying to tell him what just happened. Well, he's listening to, they're all trying to speak. He's trying to get this all together. And he's like, wait a minute. You're telling me you're shooting little men at your farm? And my dad said, you don't understand what I'm trying to tell you. No, it's not like that. He says, okay, hold on. Y'all just calm down. He says, I'm going to go call the chief. So he gets on the phone, he calls Chief Russell Greenwell. The chief tells him, says, listen, okay, try to settle him down best you can. Call Fort Campbell Army Base, which Fort Campbell was like 10 miles from Hopkinsville. Call Fort Campbell. Call the paper. See if you can get every state trooper that's out tonight. Find them and get them to Kelly. We're going to go see what's going on. So anyway, his wife hears all this too. So the chief's wife gets up and goes with him, and they head to the station. They go in there, and it's a sight to see because, like I said, 11 people, all scared to death. You could tell something happened. So he tries to calm them down. She tries to calm them down. And finally, everybody gets there. And by the time it's said and done, it's around 25 people headed back out to Kelly. A caravan of vehicles in the middle of the night. They get there. It's pitch black dark, of course. Of course, you got the moon, which is their saving grace for searching, I guess. But as they get out of their vehicles, they feel something is wrong here. It doesn't feel right. It's eerie feeling. It's just strange. And they get to looking, and when they were pulling up, the car with some of the police officers in it saw a glowing substance on the ground in the back of the house. I believe it was the post where my dad shot that one. And they run back there to look. When they run up on it, the glow stops. So they call the chief over there, and Chief Russell Greenwell goes over there and looks at the spot. And he's like, well, I don't see any glow, but there's evidence that the grass is different in that spot than it is around it. You could tell a difference. But they checked. They couldn't see anything. I think they searched for like 2 hours, 3 hours, something like that. Nothing could be found. And my grandmother, everybody's beside themselves. They're afraid to go in the house. The chief goes up to my grandmother and tells her, says, Miss Glennie, I'm so sorry, but there's nothing here. Clear evidence y'all did some shooting at something, because rifle and shotgun shells all over the outside of the house, or rifle and shotgun shells all on the inside of the house. Woodwork shot up, screens shot through. But there's nothing here to show what you shot. So they all left. So my grandmother was left, there with the rest of the family again, with nobody else to help if they had, if they came back, which she was hoping they wouldn't come back. So she gets the kids back down. Finally, she gets them asleep. She goes to her bed and lies down. My dad's sitting in the rocking chair beside her, shotgun across his lap. She's trying to get to sleep. They're wore out, physically and mentally wore out. She opens her eyes, and lo and behold, there's one at the window again. And she's thinking, oh, I'm just seeing things. I'm just tired. So she opens her eyes a second time. It's still standing there. The third time she opens her eyes, she's like, screams at my dad and says they're back. So they all get up, and here they are trying to keep them out of the house once again. So this goes on till around 5:30, 5:45 in the morning, and the sun starts coming up. When the sun starts coming up, my dad is hoping maybe they'll leave because, like I said, they noticed that the lights would make them go away. So sure enough, when that bright sunshine came up, they disappeared. Well, my dad got the family down, and he told them all. He says, listen, he says, I heard them last night. They were laughing at us. No good can come of this. So don't even say another word about it. We're just going to have to go on with our lives, forget this ever happened. And Vera asked him, says, well, how are we supposed to forget this? He says, I know it's going to be hard. I don't know, but we got to forget this happened. So anyway, they had made plans that morning. My dad and I think Billy Ray were going off to pick up some furniture from somewhere, and JC was going to go hunting that morning with a friend, well, with the neighbor behind him. And he said, let's go on with our lives. So that's what they did. The women stayed there, tried to clean up the mess. But guess what? We had another invasion to worry about, and that was the invasion of the people. As the women were trying to clean up the mess, all of a sudden they heard a commotion outside, and my grandmother looked out, and there was a caravan of cars coming up the driveway. People were jumping out, setting up tents, setting up tables to sell stuff. It was like a three-ring circus. People were coming, walking up, just walking through the house and taking souvenirs, picking up stuff out of the yard. People knocking on the door, wanting to talk to them. Wanting to know what happened last night, wanting pictures, wanting everything. And of course, Bud Ludwith, the chief engineer at WHOP, he was the one that walked in there and was able to interview the family, and he was the one that got the drawings, the infamous drawings that you see. But yeah, people just came and came and came, and it was just rough. And my dad and Uncle JC came. Well, no, it's Billy Ray. My dad and Billy Ray came back from doing the furniture thing, and he couldn't even park in his own mother's driveway. He had to park way down the road and walk to get home, and he was furious. He was ready to start shooting people. And my grandmother told him, said, I don't know what we're going to do. Said, they're taking everything we've got. And he grabbed his shotgun. He says, I know what to do. And she stopped him from doing it. And she went outside and talked to one of the police officers and asked him, could you please get these people to leave? And he says, I'll see what I can do, because he could see that this was just terrible. And he got another police officer to help him to get everybody out of the yard. But as soon as the police officers disappeared, the people came back. This just kept on going. The military did come out that morning. There was helicopters and stuff flying above. They did a search grid on the land that morning. The friend that JC went to hunt with that morning, he was actually the farmer that had a farm behind my grandmother's farm. And he said he actually seen lights out in the woods. And he went back in the house to put on his boots and grab a light. And he was going to come help because he thought the farm animals had gotten out. And he was going to go help get the animals back in. But then just as he was stepping out the door, the gunshots started. And he knew better. He thought, well, I'm not walking through these woods. He thought, well, Elmer and Billy Ray are in. If they got any farm animals out, surely all of them together can get them back in. So he went back in the house. And my Uncle JC told him, says, no, there weren't no farm animals out. And he told him what happened. And so, word got out. It had gotten out. It didn't take long at all. Everybody from everywhere was coming from everywhere, wanting to see the little beings and camping out in the yard and wanting to talk to the family. And they got no rest. Of course, my dad and Billy Ray and the girls had to go back to work. They were able to stay another day or two, but then they had to leave, and my grandmother was going to be left there. Her three kids, my Uncle JC and Aunt Eileen. Would they be able to take care of, these things if they were to come back? Because that was the big fear. Would they come back? Why were they there in the first place? And if they didn't get what they wanted the first time, would they come back to get it? That was a fear in Kelly. People that lived around there had this fear. My mom lived in Kelly with her first husband and 7 kids at the time. And she says it was terrifying. Everyone was scared. Well, my grandmother thought the best of it, and she sold the farm within 2 weeks and moved into Hopkinsville to an apartment complex. So did my Uncle JC and Aunt Eileen. Got out of there because she was afraid. She didn't know what else to do. She didn't want to leave her farm, but, she was terrified. And,
absolutely.
And that's what happened on August 21st, 1955 in Kelly, Kentucky.
That is such
Now-
a riveting story, and just how you told the story was absolutely fascinating.
Well, thank you. Well, it's a great story. And I have found out so much more over the years, people coming forward, doing more research. I'd always heard the tale about my dad shooting the one off the back fence. I didn't realize when he shot the one off the back fence, it's the one that they seen crawling up the back of the house and it floated across the yard. That's just extra creepy right there.
So creepy.
know?
And you
And,
said that they had glowing blood?
No, they had glowing eyes.
Oh, I knew
But
they had
the
glowing
bodies-
eyes. I
I
apologize. I
forgot
thought you
to
said they had iridescent blood or something of the sort.
Well, they were luminescent. I forgot to mention that. They did glow. They were luminescent. And when they would hit them, shoot them and hit them,
Mhm.
the glow would stop. But when they would come back, they would be glowing again. And my dad always said he was sure it was the same 3 or 4 that kept coming back. A lot of things you read, there was like 11 or 12 of them. He said, no, it was never that many. It was just 3 or 4, the little suckers. But, they were shooting them. Of course, these are country boys. They could shoot by the time they could walk practically. You grow up with a rifle and shotgun in your hand. So they were hitting them, no doubt.
Right. I mean,
they
I
could
certainly
hear
can't
'em.
blame them.
Yeah, and it's just crazy. It's just a crazy story. I mean, it's a granddaddy. I mean, I've been told it's the granddaddy of UFO stories. And
Yeah,
it's
that's
amazing.
Yeah. So let me ask you this, Geraldine, because you kind of referenced some of the stories being over exaggerated, under exaggerated. One thing that sticks out to me, especially in your writing and then in your retelling, the telekinetic powers of these things floating. That's something that's missed in almost every retelling of the story, with the exception of yours. At what point did you hear about them, floating? Because again, we hear about these things crawling, they're peeking in the windows.
Well, and my dad told it. And my dad told it that way. He talked about them floating. They would, shoot them. Like when would hit them off the trees or off the fence, or they just didn't fall like when you hit something and it falls. They would hit it and it would float down. And then it would scurry off. That's how he described them doing. Now that one last one he hit when he shot it off the back of the house, then he shot it off the back of the fence. Now it did more of a drop that time, and that's why he thought maybe he'd finally hurt one. So yeah, they floated.
Now, one thing about this story that's my absolute favorite, and I've been on records, saying this before. When I heard it the first time, I'm like, this sounds like utter nonsense. And my good friend Nick Alexander from the Brohio podcast is like, hey, we know Geraldine. We can get you in contact. And this is my favorite Geraldine. For anyone who ever wants to know how giving you and your family really are. This is before podcast, documentaries, books, anything. I had no online presence. I think I reached out to you on Facebook Messenger. And within a day or two, you're like, why don't you come down to my house and you can film a little interview segment for this piece we were working on?
Right.
And we drove all the way down to Kentucky, sat down in your living room, got to see your husband's amazing Star Wars collection, which that in its own deserves its own episode. If he's not,
Right?
he needs his own YouTube channel for this for sure.
He put a thing on YouTube just going through it, just showing what all he had. So he does have a thing on YouTube. He doesn't say anything. He's got a little background music, but that's it because he's not good. He won't talk. If anybody does any talking, it'll have to be me. But yeah, he's got something on there just showing his room.
Yeah. But yes, so you had invited us down. So, we came down, we sat down in your house, which I do love that you had, I think, had mentioned, I have a couple cats. You didn't tell me you had an entire army of cats before we arrived.
An army, my goodness.
Well, I think at that time you still had 20 cats. Is that right?
Yes, yes. It
Yes.
seems like every time one passes, like I said, we get another one to replace it.
That distribution system has been kind.
Yeah, but
Uh,
we come down, we sit down, and you were, extremely kind. Again, we didn't really know each other all that well. We sit down, and you made a believer out of me sitting at your living room. I'm sorry, your kitchen table.
yeah,
Because the one aspect that's often overlooked in this story, and this is what I try and remind everyone, is this was a family. This was not a group of writers. Wasn't, like Cody and myself. We're YouTubers. We constantly go out, we look for the strange, so we shouldn't be surprised when we find it inevitably. In this instance, your family wasn't looking for the strange. They weren't looking for high strangeness, anything. The Kentucky anomaly kind of just dropped itself on their
yeah,
back 40, for lack of a better term here.
yes,
And it's such a beautiful story to hear, but it absolutely just it gets under my skin like no other to hear what your family went through with the ridicule, and to know that without you, I mean, the true Hopkinsville story, of the goblins, I'm sorry, the Kelly story, it would not be told. And I was very happy to hear that Hopkinsville's kind of finally leaning into this with
yes,
I think it's the Kentucky Weird Roadmap, or I know you can get one in Hopkinsville that kind of mentions the goblins briefly, but it seemed like for a while, and again, this is no slight at the, town of Hopkinsville, but they kind of shied away from it. So what is your reaction to kind of seeing them finally lean into it? Because, towns like Point Pleasant, they made an entire tourist attraction off the Mothman
right,
sightings. I was shocked to hear that, the Bell Witch Cave has more of a tourist attraction, sort of deal than the Kelly Hopkinsville incident, which to me, like you
right.
said, it's kind of the granddaddy of them all when it comes to UFO stories.
Yeah. Well, it's really great. I was contacted last summer by Amy Rogers, who is the executive director over Visit Hopkinsville. Now, Visit Hopkinsville is different than the Chamber. The Chamber is the one that usually does this stuff, but Amy took it over at Visit Hopkinsville, and that's where it's getting its pull. She is a domino. I mean, she is fire rising. I mean, this little woman, she is after this and she's getting it. She was able to get a grant to be able to do this. Uh, and it's going to be at a big convention center there in Hopkinsville. And we're planning 2 days. We've already got a lineup of speakers. We're going to have panels, workshops, the whole deal. Um, and it's going to be in October, but we're going to have a kickoff event in August, believe it or not. And so that'll be really cool too. But yeah, it's just great. I mean, and she's meaning for this to continue. This is not going to be a one and done. She's planning on this being a yearly thing. And people love this. I mean, when we used to have the Kelly Festival and it died, of course, but after it died, I still have people contacting me about that. When's it going to start back up again? Well, it's not, it's gone, but we've got Hopkinsville involved now, which Hopkinsville can do it. And so we're really excited about the whole thing. It's going to be great.
It
Uh,
sounds really, really awesome, to be honest with you.
it's going to be great. I mean, she's like I said, she's good. She's a little firecracker, and me and Chris are part of the committee, so we know everything that's going on. Because she wants, especially she wants me involved to make sure my family, is done right, which I really appreciate that. And yeah, it's just going to be great. And another thing too, I have written another book. Um, it's in the process. It's at the publisher right now, so it should be out in the next month or two. But it's really good. It's going to be way over the top of the other two. It's got I hired somebody to do drawings for me, so it's going to actually have drawings in it, and of course pictures from back then and other things, and it's just full. And I'm looking forward to getting this one out. And it's going to have more in it, more informative, because, like I said, I've learned more since the other two books. And but back to the story, my uncle JC, and how it affected them. Somebody asked him one time, if they ever came back, would you tell anybody? And he said, no, I would never speak of this again, because, like I said, it just messed up their lives. He was so messed up. Well, you got to think though, he was in the Korean War. Um, he came back already probably traumatized, and then this happens to him. So, he had a hard way of life the rest of his life after that. He couldn't keep a job. He couldn't hold a job down. It was just really tough. And the rest of the family, like my grandmother, she didn't want to talk about it. If you got her to talk about it, you were lucky. Same as my dad. If you ever got him to talk about it, you were a lucky individual. That's just like that man and woman that came and talked to him that day when I was 8 years old. He never talked about it. They never brought that up. And I guess, they thought, well, they're going to hear about it sometime. Might as well hear about it from us. So, we heard about it all right.
I mean,
But
one thing is
Yeah.
for certain, their fear is palpable.
That man and woman, the reason they came there was to get information so they could write a book. And that's what they did. They had a book. He got the book. I wish I had the book. He let somebody borrow it and they never gave it back. And he passed away before he did get it back. But I've tried to find the book. I can't find it. But he would get so mad when people would try to get a hold of him to talk about that story. He'd pull that book out where he had it hid at, wave it around in the air and cuss and carry on about people wanting to bring that story back up. And but yeah, it affected them. Even to this day, the three that are still alive, they don't want to talk about it. It's scary for them.
Absolutely. Now,
It's
I
up a nightmare.
I've been looking for that book for about 5 years, and I'm gonna find it. That's one thing, I made that promise to you. I will find that book at some point.
I get on the internet and look every once in a while just to see if I can find it. And when I think that's the one, I'll look at it. Nope, that's not it.
Now, you did bring up the drawings and like the police sketches of the goblins. So based off of your, the I guess firsthand accounts that you heard, how close were those sketches to what your family actually saw that night?
Apparently, very close. The three sketches that um, Bud Ludwig did, they're the famous three sketches, and that's the trademark for the Goblin Con is the three sketches, which I'm very proud of. But yeah, that's them. I mean, my dad is so funny because the story is when he did come in that morning, he was raging mad because he had to park down the road. Um, but Ledwith was already in there, and he'd already gotten descriptions from some of the girls and my grandmother and Billy Ray. Well, not Billy Ray, JC. And so, he was looking at them and he says, no, 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 no. The head is much rounder. It was round. And so, his goblin has a round head, a rounder head, where the others are a more pointed face, which, I always thought was pretty cool.
No, for sure. I wanted to interject just for a quick second here. I'm trying as a storyteller and as a content creator myself, I try to put myself in the shoes of the people who experience the phenomenon. And to think of not only the kids, but I mean, just the family as a whole being inside and hearing the clicking of those clawed feet and seeing, I believe you said it was like a clawed hand at some point as well.
Yeah,
That is utterly terrifying to imagine.
exactly. Exactly. The whole thing's terrifying.
Absolutely. And it seems like the perfect storm of events as well, you know?
Yep. I mean, it's great. I mean, it's a fantastic story.
No, it absolutely is, and a terrifying one. I can't reiterate that enough, not to sound like a broken record here, but my goodness, that is
And,
one for the ages.
we'll never know for sure about certain things either. Just like I have been told that a spacecraft crashed 3 miles from Kelly that morning,
Oh my gosh.
and that Wright Patterson, well, military swooped in and took it up and took it to Wright Patterson. Well, Wright Patterson does have a place where they do not let anybody go in. And it makes you wonder. And it may have stayed at Wright Patterson a while. They may have shipped it off down to Area 51. We don't know.
No, I mean, it's
but
definitely a
um,
possibility for sure. It sounds fairly plausible.
through my research and stuff, that morning, one of the neighbors actually saw something
Hmm.
take off from my family's farm and go, across the sky. And there were several people during the night that night before this happened to them that saw things. There were state troopers, there was military at Fort Campbell actually saw something going across the sky. They didn't even know what it was. It wasn't anything they had there,
Right.
anything they had ever seen before.
Now,
See,
something I did want to ask as well, if you don't mind, was when the goblins essentially disappeared the first time. Did anyone ever speculate as far as where they went? If they just hid off in foliage, or if there was any caves in that area?
Well, we don't know, and nobody really thought about it. Uh, my family was just hoping they were gone, of
Right.
course. Um,
Well, I
Now the
can't I
people
can't
that were
blame them there, but
looking,
my mind wants to wander, you know.
right, right. Then the people that were looking for them, they wanted to find. Well, some of them wanted to find something. There was a photographer there for the newspaper and his girlfriend that were there that night, and they wanted to find them because they wanted pictures of them. They were looking at the big time there. Hey, if we can get a
Yeah.
picture of one, and we can really get out here in the world. But and they were very upset that they couldn't get a picture of one. But yeah, but proper protocol was never taken in this case. I mean, samples were never taken. The area was not roped off or anything. By the next morning, they said upwards of 2,000 people had roamed that land
My
by
gosh.
Tuesday.
That's so many.
So it was contaminated no matter what. So
Right.
nothing was ever done properly or taken. Now, I was told by somebody that was actually present there that when the military was there doing their search, something was found. Something was threw under somebody's shirt. This something was thrown in the back of a truck, and that truck took off.
Hmm.
One of those things you'll never know what it is. We'll never find out.
now I do love that you brought up Wright Patterson because I grew up in Ohio, not too far from Wright Pat Air Force Base. Hangar 13 is legendary in the UFO sphere, going back to Roswell. And what's really interesting about Hangar 13 specifically in the Wright Patterson connection is a relatively similar UFO crash happened in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, which is not too far from where I currently live, where Wright Patterson had come down for an alleged training exercise after a craft had crashed. And what's funny is the local newspapers here, as I was researching that case, reference what happened that night in Kelly and said that, even the creatures were relatively similar. And then they mentioned the response from Wright Patterson and then Fort Campbell. Now, Fort Campbell's in Kentucky. That's a pretty good drive over to Missouri. Why did Fort Campbell come to assist Wright Patterson Air Force Base from Dayton, Ohio? It's one of those things we'll never know. But that's
Right.
Yeah,
Interesting.
yeah, but it's an extremely weird little synchronicity there. And the more I dug into the Fort Campbell aspect, their official records have been relatively scrubbed, even with the FOIA request that we put in a few years ago. They didn't want to give us very much information. The information we got was extremely redacted, with the exception of we found the MPs' names that came up the next morning, and the official statement and what wasn't blacked out was just extremely strange. Family seems credible, and that was it. And
Hmm.
now you know the connection with Wright Patterson, the Project Blue Book, J. Allen Hynek, all of that stuff. It does lead credence into them also responding to Kelly that night because it's not that far of a trek for one, but then for two, this was right up their alley with what they were doing because not a lot of folks know Wright Patterson is a massive Air Force base. It's definitely like the heart of Dayton, Ohio. It's on the outskirts of Dayton,
Right.
and it's a
Gigantic.
beautiful location. But it's one of the most secretive U.S. Air Force bases in the world, and they are the masters of what they call hiding in plain sight. Again, Hangar 13, you'll never know what's going on in there. I mean, everything from the Roswell aliens to the real gold from Fort Knox is been in or is currently hiding underground in Dayton, Ohio, a very unassuming location. But I do love the connection there. But I did want to ask you this. After you became aware of what happened, did you personally have any paranormal, supernatural happenings? Because there's a weird side effect that we've kind of researched a little bit, Cody, myself, and myself personally, with
Mhm.
contactees that after they have something like this happen or their family has something like this happen to them, they seem more prone to paranormal happenings, whether that be poltergeist activity, ghosts, UFOs, whatever. Have you yourself personally found any of those kind of hanging around in your life after becoming aware of this situation, apart from the fear that you referenced earlier as a little girl hearing the story for the first time and watching the doors and windows?
Yeah, yeah, we've had little things happen. I haven't since we've moved here where we're at now, but we've had things happen where we lived at before here that have been strange. And I've seen strange lights that are unexplainable. I mean, uh, like, I don't know, I was, I think, around 12 years old. And like I said, at nighttime, I always made sure all the curtains and everything was closed tight where nothing could look in or see in or whatever. But I remember one night back, I think I was around 12, 13 years old and went to bed. And like always, the curtains were tight. Nothing could see in. I couldn't see out for some really strange reason that night. Don't ask me why, because I never would do this. I looked out the window. Wrong. Going across the sky was this square. It was just, that's the only way I could tell. It's a square with lights in the corners. And this was it was winter, and it was a clear winter night. And it's like, what the heck? So, no other time I would have done that. What made me open that curtain at night and look out? You know, to this day, it has not made any sense to me. Why? So, of course, I just got in bed. The next morning, I thought, well, I'll see if anybody says anything at breakfast.
Mhm.
So, got up, went to breakfast, got ready for school. Just listen to see if anybody said about, did they see anything last night? But then I thought, well, why would they have been, unless they looked out too. But nobody, nothing was ever said. I never mentioned it until, now later in years. But, I've always wondered about that. Why? Why did I look out that night when I've never, ever would do that before? It didn't make any sense to me. Like something made me look out that window that night,
Yeah, it seemed
you
like
know?
Yeah.
something drawed you to that.
Mhm. And, we've had paranormal things happen, um, really weird stuff. But,
Would you mind telling the story? And I butcher this every time. You guys had, I think, a Native American army at one point. C- w-
yes, the Native
uh,
American thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I apologize. I know I've butchered that story before, so I try not to tell that on your behalf. But would you be willing to? Because I have another question after this. But this is a story that when you told it to me the first time, I was like, Geraldine, we've talked for hours. I've been to your house. You never mentioned this until a throwaway story at the end of one of the other podcast episodes we did, and it was crazy.
It was crazy. The place we owned before we lived now, we owned a farm. It was 32 acres. We call it a farm, but it was nothing but woods. Uh, Loved it that way. Thick, thick woods. Anyway, at the time we owned a metaphysical shop of all things, and I had people that worked there. I had this one little girl that she could talk to dead people. And then I had a tarot reader and a Reiki all the stuff that you would have for a metaphysical shop, which, hey, that's me. Anyway, one night, the little girl, she was only 19. We were good friends and she spent the night with us. And she was in the guest room. And the next morning, my husband had went to work, and she come up to me and said, "Listen, I had an Indian kept coming to the bedroom last night." I'm like, what?" She said, "An Indian kept coming to the bedroom." I said, "Okay." I says, "And?" And she says, "Well," she said, "I finally followed it." She says, "It took me through the house and to the dining room, kitchen area." And we had these huge windows in this house. I mean, monster windows. And the dining area looked out the backyard. And so she said that's where it took her. So she followed it. And she looked out in the backyard and she said there was like 50 of them standing out there. I'm like, all righty now. Okay. Of course, chills. But anyway, we go to the shop that day, and my Reiki girl and a tarot man comes in, and we tell them the story, and they're like, "Well, we need to go out there and check this out." So they come that evening after we close shop, and they're walking around, and the little girl tells me, she says, I see a woman standing over there. I'm like, okay. And we're out in the backyard. And they're like, "Yeah, something's happened to this land." Says one of them said that they felt fire. Something was on fire. And they says, "Your land is very unhappy." Says, "We need to do a cleansing." I'm like, okay. So that's following Sunday afternoon. They come and they have all their stuff that they have, and we go back out there in the woods. And I mean, they do the whole 9 yards, sage and blood, good blood. And I mean, just have all this stuff. And it's like, okay. So anyway, it gets quiet. Nothing happens. And it's not a week or two later. I've talked to this guy that comes in the shop, and he tells me about the um, Trail of Tears. And he said, Trail of Tears went through your land, right? I'm like, oh, really? Well, that would make a lot of sense then. And another thing too is when we bought the land, of course, we walked it. And there were like 3 huge mounds back there in the woods, perfect mounds, just grass just growing over them, beautiful mounds. And we always wondered about those mounds. And then, that guy told me about the Trail of Tears going through there, and it started making perfect sense. So, we didn't have any trouble after that. Now, we did have another incident before the Indian incident, but that's another story. But the whole Indian thing was really, scary to think that, I don't know how long they've been happening because, I can't see dead people. Now, before that happened, before she's seen the dead people, I did have something happen, and that was really strange. Like one night we were in bed, and our bedroom was on the top floor, and we had this big deck that goes out through the French doors from our bedroom. And there's no stairs going up to that. So you can't get to that deck. No way. I mean, it's high. It was high up in the air. And we're laying there in bed watching TV, and there is like something thrown at the glass door. I mean, something hits that glass, and we're laying there, and we're like, what the heck? I'm thinking a bat, something hit the glass. And so I got a flashlight beside the bed, so I just picked the flashlight up and look out there, and I'm expecting to see a Bigfoot looking over the back of the deck, the whole 9 yards. Don't see anything. Don't see nothing on the deck. Well, we put it aside, and it ain't, I don't know, a few minutes later, 3, 4 minutes later, and bam, something hits the window again. All right, we're thinking, what the heck? This isn't right. So my husband gets up and actually looks this time, and there's nothing out there. Well, gets in bed, and we're like, okay. Well, guess what? It happens a third time. Well, the third time it happens, I'm like, oh, no, 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 no. So I just cover up my head, and I'm thinking, please go to sleep. Just go to sleep. Well, it ain't but maybe a week later. My husband, he has to get up and go to work at 6 o'clock. And I don't, I get up with him. And then when he leaves, I go back to bed and sleep another hour, hour and a half before I have to get up and go open the shop. Well, I'm headed back to bed. And I'm laying in bed. Of course, the cats are laying there with, not all 20, but the cats are laying there with me. When all of a sudden, guess what? Tap, tap, tap on that glass.
I got chills.
I'm like, what the heck? And the cats all raise up, ears straight up in the air, all of them looking toward that glass French door. There's nothing standing there, but something clearly, it sounded like with a fingernail, went tap, tap, tap.
Mm.
You talk about somebody getting up out of that bed, getting ready, and heading down to the shop. I did.
I cannot blame you
And
whatsoever.
then it was after that, the whole Indian thing happened.
Gosh, that is so creepy.
It gives me chills right
Oh,
now.
I've got goosebumps right now. And I wasn't even
Yeah,
there.
yeah. That's two of the creepiest things that's ever happened. But yeah.
See, these things are always super interesting to me because again, it seems like these things do follow each other. And it's interesting that you kind of had that happen after being sort of initiated, for lack of a better term, here into your family's history. Because there's really only two case studies that come to mind, especially in this time frame. You have the Kelly Hopkinsville incident, and then the Woodrow Derenberger case with injured cold. And
Mhm.
what's kind of interesting is I've had a chance now to speak to both daughters of the case, yourself and Tanya Derenberger before she passed, and it's so intriguing to me to see both of your approaches being so similar. Whereas Tanya, she allegedly had direct contact with injured cold. Depending on which book you're reading of hers, she grew up with injured cold, grew up with all of those folks that were kind of surrounding his Carl or Ardo, and
Mhm.
basically all of those folks. So it's really interesting to see you guys kind of keep your family's legacy alive in such unique ways. But I know we're getting kind of close to the end of our time here, but I have to ask you, what is the biggest thing about this case that's misrepresented to you? Because I know that, we've talked in the past. The one thing that I shut down instantly when someone brings it up to me is that these were drunk carnies. Because I know, you're knowing
Mhm.
your grandmother the way that I've gotten to know her through your stories. I know she would not allow a single drop of whiskey in that house. But
Exactly.
what else about the story to you has just been misrepresented, either purposely or not purpose?
Well,
Because
that's the top thing, the whole alcohol thing. And of course, it bugs me to no avail when I'm speaking somewhere, and one of the questions, is usually now here lately it's been pretty good. It's been not part of the discussion, but every once in a while you'll get that one person that thinks they're cute, and that's what it is. They think they're cute, and they're going to bring up the alcohol thing. Well, I shut it down as fast as they bring it up because there was no alcohol there that night. Nothing was ever found. No steel, no nothing, because this was my grandmother, and it's a wonder she even allowed them to smoke around the kids, much less drink. Um, but yeah, that's the main thing. And I don't know what the other would be except just belief. I mean, this was a innocent family that went through something that night. They had an experience with some kind of being, whether it be paranormal, whether it be extraterrestrial, which we believe it was extraterrestrial, simply for the fact all the things that were seen and heard during the day and during the night that night, even the following morning. So, I guess that's the main thing, belief, but and the alcohol. But It's hard not to. And, there are so many people that come forward and said they truly believed it, and so many that had experiences, like Chief Russell Greenwell himself back in 1952 had an experience with an object in the sky. The desk sergeant, him and another officer had a experience where they seen three UFOs. So people like this believed my family. I just had a discussion with a lady here while I was writing the book. I found out about her. Her daddy was one of the state troopers that were there that night. And she told me out of her own mouth that her daddy would often talk about this case and say that he truly believed something happened to that family that night. They had some kind of event. Something happened. He said it's too much there not to believe. And I tried to get the report from Frankfurt on this case, and it couldn't be found. So I thought, okay. Because she told me, she says, you can get this case. I'm like, do you think I can? And she said, oh, yeah. She said, they keep all these cases. You just got to get a hold of Frankfurt. So I did the paperwork, did everything I was supposed to do to get it. And it got back to me and said it could not be found. And I'm like, okay.
It's always funny how that works. Now, I guess two things real fast. One, I wanted to thank you for kind of explaining that there at the end, because that to me, that was my turning point for believing this case happened the way that you have presented it. When you looked me in the eye in your kitchen and said, this was a family that did not ask for this, and this happened. I kind of got some weird chills there because I felt like I was sitting back at your kitchen table. So I do appreciate that. But before we go here, can you kind of walk us through Goblin Con's coming up? You have a new book coming out. Where can folks, find information on the new book, find information on Goblin Con, and find more Geraldine just in general? I know you do a bunch of podcast appearances, but is there a way that folks can reach out to you if they maybe have some information for you, some stories, or what's your, what's the way to contact you?
For Goblin Con, it's real easy. Just look up goblinconky.com. That's the website. You can go on there and find out all the information. They're adding stuff all the time. So, they'll have the schedules and everything up for everybody. And if you want to be a vendor, hey, we're taking them. And they also have a Facebook page. I guess it's just Goblin Con, but I'm sure once you click it in, it'll be easy to find. As far as I'm concerned, the only thing I really do have right now is my Etsy shop. And you can go on my Etsy shop and get a hold of me there. My email is really simple. It's gstith@hotmail.com. If you want to get a hold of me there, I'm not hard. Just look me up on the internet. You can find me, believe me. And, I'm always, around if you got a story you need to get off your chest, because I have had people get a hold of me just to tell me, something has happened to them that, that they just needed to talk to somebody. And of course, I'm on Facebook. No problem there. I'm easy to find there too. So, any of those.
Now, I cannot.
My Etsy shop is Aliens and Goblins, by the way, all lowercase, all scrunched together.
Thank you. I was literally going to say I cannot recommend your Etsy shop enough. Your girly goblins are next level cute. I have gotten so many compliments over the years. Even Cody's partner Megan brought them up because they're in my guest room. They kind of sit up. They sit up on the windowsill and kind of watch over them while they sleep.
Oh.
Dude, they're amazing.
Oh, well, thank you.
Of course. I did want to say.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Cody.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to say before we went, it's been an absolute honor to speak with you. Like I said, I had heard a lot about you. I've heard a lot about the case, and to hear you tell the story in such detail it was riveting, and I'm honored to have been here and had you on the show, and I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you. I'm honored y'all have me on here. It's nice. Like I say, it's always a good day when you can talk about the goblins.
Yeah, absolutely. I did want to ask as well, since we are here, would you mind if I did a little bit of a deep dive on like a Mystery Archives episode and maybe get just the different projects a little bit more publicity as well, as tie it back to our own show.
Sure.
Awesome. Beautiful. Thank
Sure.
you. I appreciate that.
Well, Geraldine, as always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. I'm sure we got to make sure it's not as long before we talk again, because every time I talk to you, you have new cats, new projects, new everything going on. I do need some updated pictures of the Star Wars room, and one day I'm gonna have your husband on the show just to tell me like how did this get started? Because what's crazy is it's we got invited to your home. We kind of expected the unexpected a bit. I think when you messaged me like look for the gargoyles outside, I'm like, okay, this
Oh, yeah.
this all tracks. I make this makes sense. And then you mentioned you're like, oh, would you guys like some of the Goblin figurines? Which you gave me number 93, which was just hilarious because Thelema, and it kind of tied into the investigation we were doing at the time. And then you just kind of like haphazardly, roughly mentioned, hey, do you guys like Star Wars? I'm like, well, who doesn't? And you show us this giant room, and you could not have undersold the Star Wars collection enough. And our listeners, you guys have no idea. Think about the biggest Star Wars collection you've ever seen with the most detail, and then times it by 10, and that's roughly what your husband has just hidden
Yes.
in your house.
Dude,
Right.
I would have paid good money to just see the expression on your face
Oh, yeah.
when
Yeah.
it was presented to
You
you.
see anybody's expression when they walk down there, it's just amazing.
They're like, good
It's
Lord.
like, "What?"
Just thank you so much for taking the time, and Cody will be in touch. I'll be in touch. Let us know if you need anything from us for Goblin Con or just anything as your books are coming out. When that does come out, let me know so we can get it. We'll
Okay.
get it on the show.
Okay, great. Sounds great, Bob. Thanks, Cody. Thanks, Bob.
Yes, thank you.
Well, Cody, I've got to know your thoughts on this because I know you were familiar with the story roughly beforehand. You kind of got a rough synopsis through Hellier and then through some of my stories. But now hearing it from Geraldine, hearing that there's an MA episode coming out, that's huge. Very excited for that because your deep dives are next level. Where are you landing on the Kelly Hopkinsville story now, hearing it from the horse's mouth, for lack of a better term?
Well, I've always been fascinated by the story. If I'm not mistaken, didn't we visit the original farm one night?
Yeah, we accidentally found it.
Yeah, I was gonna say there was a strange synchronicity there, and I know that we accidentally ended up there. So to put everything together, not only from what I had heard from you and what I had researched on my own, but having been to the farm where this took place, and then to also hear it from Geraldine in such riveting detail, I really am convinced that that family experienced what they said they experienced.
I'm on the same page, and it's always fun to sit down with Geraldine because what's interesting is, like she mentioned, she's always figuring out new facts about the case. And the tie-in with Wright Patterson, that just makes perfect sense. And eventually, we're gonna do a deep dive here on Project Blue Book. The kind of I guess the evidence, which is very, very, it's a hard term to even use, but what we've seen come out of Wright Patterson through the FOIA acts over the years, along with just the representation that Wright Patterson has when it comes to UFO cover-ups, because people don't really understand that when they think about Roswell, New Mexico, Wright Pat they had their hands so far in that cookie jar, they could literally feel the crumbs at the bottom, and people don't really understand that aspect. So to hear that they were possibly involved in this case, it's not surprising at all.
No, I can't say that I'm surprised, and I would love that, man. I'm always down to do some deep dives in general. But yeah, I think Project Blue Book will certainly make for a fascinating episode, no doubt.
Absolutely. Well, with that being said, I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode. Make sure you guys go and check out the Etsy shop that Geraldine runs. Check out her books. I cannot oversell them enough. They are phenomenal. They are extremely well written, and it's, again, in my opinion, the best way to hear the story because it's again, from the daughter of someone who was there that evening. You can't really get much better, a much truer narrative when it comes to high strangeness. Cody, as you can attest, these things often come from a friend of a friend of a sister's cousin, and by the time that you actually hear the details are so muddy, you can't really separate fact from fiction. But with Geraldine, she's made it her entire life's work to keep this story going because her family did not want to talk about this, not want to discuss it.
Right. And I absolutely agree. I'm gonna have to pick up some of her books myself. And I haven't personally been to her Etsy shop yet, but that's something I'm about to dive into after we finish up the podcast here. But it's also very commendable that she has put so much effort into not only getting the story as clear as possible and as straight as possible, but keeping that legacy and her family story alive. Because I think if I was in her shoes, I would want to do the same thing.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you guys so much for listening. Make sure if you guys do enjoy this episode, leave us a 5-star review over there on Spotify and Apple. It helps us out more than you guys know. We appreciate you guys so much. We hope you have a great night.
Also, please like the video on YouTube and subscribe. Share it around with a friend. Wherever you find podcasts, whether it's a YouTube or, as Bob mentioned, Spotify, Apple, Spreaker, please give us a 5-star rating. And we love reading your comments. Leave us a comment there as well. Thanks, guys.